The studio lights flared with a brilliance that concealed more than they revealed, casting the stage in a glow too polished, too artificial to hold the weight of what was about to unfold. Millions of viewers settled into their homes expecting banter, celebrity charm, and the illusion of morning comfort. But behind the cameras, producers whispered to one another with the taut awareness that sometimes live television is not entertainment. It is trial by fire. And today, Mark Wahlberg was not entering a talk show. He was stepping into a courtroom. The audience clapped as he emerged, a familiar face from decades of film, his walk measured, his smile restrained. He carried with him the rugged reputation of Hollywood's self-made man, the Boston grit polished into global stardom. Yet his eyes flickered with a guardedness, as if he understood instinctively that this was no casual conversation. The panel seated across from him, 5 hosts armed not with scripts but with sharpened opinions, were not interviewers. They were prosecutors waiting for the first crack in his defense. The applause quieted, and the opening pleasantries drifted, like smoke. A host leaned in, voice bright but edged with curiosity. "Mark, we're thrilled to have you here, but let's be real. Your journey hasn't been the smooth, easy Hollywood fairy tale people imagine. You've been open about your past, and people want to know, how do you reconcile who you were with who you are today?" The air shifted. Wahlberg adjusted his posture, his smile thinning. He had answered variations of this question for years, but something about the tone, calm, almost judicial, sent a ripple of tension through the room. The camera zoomed closer, capturing the flicker of unease across his face, the tightening of his jaw. He leaned forward, his voice steady but low, the cadence of a man used to rehearsed defenses. "Look, I've made mistakes. Big ones. I've paid for them. But I worked every day to change, to be better. That's what life's about, right? Growth. Redemption." The crowd responded with polite applause, but not warmth. It was the kind of applause that sounded like a jury acknowledging evidence rather than celebrating a victory. A silence followed, thicker than the sound of clapping, as if the jurors, millions watching at home, were waiting for cross-examination. Another host shifted her chair, eyes narrowing. "But Mark, don't you think Hollywood has a way of forgiving certain people, while others never get the same chance?" Her words carried no accusation on the surface, but in the undercurrent there was weight, privilege, power, selective justice. Wahlberg exhaled sharply, trying to keep the edge from his voice. He straightened his back, fists curling subtly in his lap. "I can't speak for Hollywood, I can only speak for myself. I did the work, I changed. I've devoted my life to making sure others don't make the same mistakes I made. That has to count for something." The audience murmured now, the kind of low reaction that television producers crave but guests dread. It wasn't agreement. It was judgment forming in real time. The studio, once a stage of laughter and easy conversation, now felt like oak-paneled walls of a trial chamber, with cameras acting as a jury's eyes, recording each breath, each twitch of discomfort. The moderator tried to smooth the tension, her smile rehearsed but her voice betraying awareness of the clash forming. "Mark, no one's denying your hard work. But when we talk about forgiveness in this country, it's complicated. Some people never get it, no matter how much they change." That was the fulcrum. Forgiveness. Redemption. The words that had stalked Wahlberg for decades, always in question, never settled. He shifted again, a flash of frustration darting across his face before he pulled it back into composure. "I know what I've done, I live with it every day, but I also know what I've given back. My faith, my family, my work. It's all been about making amends. If that's not enough, then what's the point of even trying?" His words hung, heavy in the air. The crowd clapped, louder this time, but split, half encouragement, half theater. The hosts exchanged quick glances, the kind lawyers do when a witness reveals both strength and vulnerability in the same breath. From that moment forward, the tone of the morning was set. No one in the room was fooled into believing this was entertainment anymore. This was a hearing, a live deposition broadcast to millions. Wahlberg was not simply promoting a film or recounting an anecdote. He was testifying, under oath of public opinion, that he was a changed man. And the jury was not sympathetic. They wanted more. The cameras lingered on his face, catching every tremor of restraint, every calculation behind his eyes. The audience shifted in their seats. The hosts leaned forward as one, unified in silent agreement that the gloves could now come off. And Wahlberg, breathing heavier than before, seemed to realize that his redemption was no longer his to declare, it was theirs to grant, or deny. The stage, once bright and safe, had become a crucible. The trial of Mark Wahlberg had begun, and the first gavel had just fallen. The applause dwindled, leaving only the hum of cameras and the faint shuffle of chairs. Mark Wahlberg sat upright, adjusting the cuffs of his jacket as though tightening invisible armor. The tension from the first round of questioning hadn't faded. It had only thickened, curling into the air like smoke that refused to dissipate. He knew the real trial hadn't even started. What awaited him now was not a question about his past, but the public dissection of his entire career. For years, his story had been told like a Hollywood redemption arc. The troubled Boston kid who fought his way out of violence and chaos to become a global star. Magazine covers celebrated his grit, his reinvention, his Catholic devotion, his empire of movies and business ventures. Yet beneath the headlines, shadows lingered. Police records from the 1980s, violent altercations, racial assaults that never fully faded from public memory. To some, his rise was inspiring. To others, it was proof that America reserved forgiveness for the few, not the many. And now, in this studio, those two versions of his life collided head-on. Sunny Hostin leaned forward, her tone calm but edged with prosecutorial sharpness. Mark, you've spoken often about second chances, but many people watching today can't help but notice. You got chances most people never do. Your past, it wasn't small. There were violent incidents, racial incidents. Do you think Hollywood's embrace of you reflects a kind of double standard? The question struck with the precision of a cross-examiner. Wahlberg's jaw tightened. He clasped his hands together, thumbs pressing into each other as if grounding himself. He answered slowly, choosing each word like a man aware that one slip could turn into evidence against him. I don't deny what I did. I can't. I've apologized. I've tried to make amends. I've been blessed, yes, but I've also worked harder than most people can imagine. Nothing was handed to me. I've been fighting since I was 13 years old. Every film, every role, every business, I earned it. The audience applauded. But again, it wasn't unanimous. In their claps, there was a division, half admiration, half skepticism. A woman in the front row nodded fervently, while another folded her arms, lips pressed tight. The studio had become a gallery of jurors, split down the middle. Joy Behar interjected, her voice laced with the dry sarcasm that often doubled as a blade. Earned, yes, but let's be real. Most people don't get to erase a criminal record by starring in movies. If you were still in Boston, still that kid on the street, would anyone be giving you these chances? The remark drew a wave of laughter from the audience, but it was laughter with an edge. Wahlberg's face flushed, his shoulders stiffened, his voice dropped gravelly, more forceful than before. I didn't erase anything. I live with it. Every day. I pray on it. I talk to my kids about it so they don't make my mistakes. I've spent years giving back, helping inner-city kids, investing in communities. Don't tell me I erased my past. I carry it with me. The defiance in his tone silenced the laughter. For a moment his words hung with sincerity, even vulnerability. But Sunny pressed again, unwilling to let the point drift into sentiment. Mark, you talk about carrying your past. But the truth is, victims carried it too. People still remember. Some wounds don't heal just because the person who caused them found success. Isn't redemption supposed to center the victim, not the perpetrator? The air stilled. Wahlberg looked down, exhaling through his nose, his chest rising and falling with restrained frustration. He clasped his hands tighter, then looked back up, his voice trembling not with weakness but with contained fury. I've met with victims. I've tried to make amends. Not everything gets healed, I know that. But if we don't believe people can change, then what are we even doing? What's the point of faith, forgiveness, second chances? What are we telling our kids? That if you mess up young, your life is over? Forever? The words echoed, and for a moment the panel hesitated. It was as though the accused had turned the tables, questioning the court itself. The audience erupted in applause, louder than before, some rising to their feet. But just as quickly the applause fractured. Half cheers, half silence. The silence of dissenters unmoved. Whoopi Goldberg leaned forward now, her voice carrying the weight of both empathy and skepticism. Mark, I hear you. I believe in change, but here's the problem. America doesn't offer forgiveness equally. You're sitting here because you're famous, you're rich, and you had a way out. Millions of kids don't. And that's why people question you. It's not just about you, it's about the system that let you rise. Wahlberg's eyes darted from face to face as though standing before a jury that refused to unify. He shifted in his seat, shoulders tightening under the scrutiny. His reply came fast, sharp, unfiltered. So what do you want me to do? Stop working? Give it all back? I can't change what happened 30 years ago. All I can do is live better now, show people it's possible to change. If you can't accept that, then maybe you're the one who doesn't believe in redemption. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by a swell of applause and a chorus of uneasy murmurs. The clash had sharpened. This was no longer an interview. It was a cultural referendum. The panel sat back, eyes fixed on Wahlberg. The studio lights seemed harsher now, shadows cutting across his face, highlighting the lines etched by age and conflict. He was no longer the smiling movie star promoting a project. He was a man on trial, defending his very right to be forgiven. The tension lingered as the cameras panned across the room. No verdict had been given, but the battle lines were drawn. The career they celebrated had become Exhibit A. The redemption story, once scripted neatly in glossy magazines, was now under cross-examination before a nation divided, and the trial was only beginning. The silence between exchanges felt longer now, as if the walls of the studio themselves had begun to lean. In listening, the audience shifted in their seats, sensing the air had thickened with something beyond routine morning chatter. This was no longer a polite conversation. It was cross-examination, and everyone present felt it in their bones. It began almost imperceptibly. Sunny Hostin, her voice calm but sharpened with intent, tilted her head and asked with surgical precision, Mark, when you talk about growth, do you ever wonder if America forgets too quickly? If Hollywood allows men like you to rewrite their stories before fully facing the damage they left behind? The words slid across the table like a blade, subtle but lethal. Wahlberg's face tightened, his jaw set, lips pressed into a line before parting. He shifted in his seat, posture stiffening as though every muscle braced against the question. I don't hide from anything, he said, his voice low, steady. I've talked about my past, I've owned it, but I've also worked tirelessly to move forward, to make things right. At some point, you've got to let people grow. The reply landed, but it was clipped, defensive. The audience murmured again, not with enthusiasm, but with a sound like jurors whispering during testimony. And in those murmurs was the weight of doubt. Joy Behar leaned in, her tone deceptively light. But isn't it convenient? Growth is wonderful. Redemption is beautiful. But most people don't get book deals, blockbuster movies, or fan bases cheering for their redemption. You did. Doesn't that tilt the scale in your favor? Wahlberg turned sharply, his eyes flashing. His voice rose a notch, carrying the cadence of a man resisting judgment. I didn't ask for favors. I fought for everything I have. My past nearly destroyed me, but I didn't let it. I changed because I had to, not because Hollywood wanted a redemption story. The audience clapped, scattered, uneven, half supportive, half skeptical. The tension was visible now, not just audible. Wahlberg's hand drummed lightly on his knee, betraying his restlessness. His breaths came faster, his words clipped shorter, each one heavier with impatience. Then, Meghan McCain, leaning back, until now, pushed forward with a question that sliced the room into silence. Mark, let's be blunt. You physically attacked people. You served time. Some of those attacks were racially motivated. When you talk about growth, are you acknowledging that pain? Or are you just framing your journey as inspiration while their scars still exist? The question landed like a gavel strike. The crowd gasped audibly, a collective intake of breath, and the camera zoomed in instinctively, capturing every twitch of Wahlberg's face. His composure faltered for the first time. His eyes narrowed. His lips parted and his shoulders tensed visibly under the tailored jacket. He leaned forward, his voice lower but charged with heat. I've acknowledged it. I've apologized for it. I've carried it for decades. Don't sit here and act like I'm pretending it didn't happen. Those scars you're talking about, they've haunted me too. McCain didn't flinch. But haunted you how, Mark? Because you still became a millionaire movie star, those people didn't. Isn't that the difference? The audience erupted, some clapping, some booing, the studio now pulsing with the electricity of conflict. The host sat straighter, feeding on the charged air while Wahlberg's face flushed, his voice climbing with raw emotion. You don't know me. He shot back, his words quick, fiery. You don't know what I've lived with, the nights I've spent asking God for forgiveness. You don't see the work I've done in communities, the kids I've helped. You want to reduce me to my worst mistakes forever? Then why even talk? About change at all? The audience roared. Divided cheers, divided jeers, the sound of a nation split in miniature. Producers gestured frantically behind cameras, but no one could reel it back. The interview had become a trial, and Wahlberg's fury was evidence in itself. Sonny leaned in again, quieter now, but more piercing for it. Mark, we're not reducing you. We're questioning the system that allowed you to rise while so many others fell. You are the exception. And exceptions make people wonder if redemption is a privilege, not a right. Wahlberg froze at her words. His chest rose sharply, a long exhale escaping through his nose. He clasped his hands together again, knuckles white, the mask of composure slipping into open frustration. His reply came slow, each word bitten off. Redemption is not a privilege, it's a fight, and I fought for it every single day of my life. Don't tell me it was given to me. I bled for it. The room erupted again, some rising to clap, others shaking their heads. On live television, America itself was fracturing in real time. The sparks had ignited. The polite facade of an interview was gone, burned away in the heat of accusation and defiance. What remained was raw, an actor no longer playing a part, a panel unafraid to prosecute, and an audience bearing witness to the collision of past sins and present defenses. By the time the applause settled, the stage was no longer a morning set. It was a courtroom, and Mark Wahlberg, sweating under the lights, was no longer a guest. He was a defendant, and the trial was only tightening its grip. The sparks had become fire, but the hosts weren't finished. They had circled him like seasoned prosecutors, sensing the weakness in his defense, the slip in his composure. The polite veneer of morning television was gone now. This was no longer a panel of entertainers. They were examiners, bearing the weight of millions watching at home, ready to push harder, ready to corner him against the wall of his own contradictions. Joy Behar adjusted her glasses, leaning forward with the patience of a juror waiting for her turn to strike. Her voice was steady, but its edge was unmistakable. Mark, you keep saying you've changed. You say you've done the work. But here's the truth. In America, not everyone even gets the chance to do the work. If you weren't Mark Wahlberg, if you weren't white from Boston with connections, do you think you'd even be sitting here? The words cut into the silence like a knife. The audience gasped, then murmured, a wave of whispers rippling across the room. Wahlberg's jaw clenched visibly, and he shifted in his chair, his face hardening. He swallowed once, his Adam's apple bobbing in the camera's close-up. That's not fair, he snapped, his voice rising with the controlled fury of a man who knew the trial was tightening around him. You don't know what it took. You don't know what I had to overcome. I didn't have a silver spoon in my mouth. I grew up with nothing. I fought for everything. Nobody gave me an easy pass. The audience clapped, some cheering, but it wasn't unified. Half the room still sat stiff, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. Sunny Hostin struck next, her prosecutorial instincts sharpened from years in courtrooms. Her tone was calm, but the precision was surgical. Mark, you keep framing this as your personal fight. But redemption isn't just about you. It's about accountability to the people you hurt. It's about privilege in a system where most black and brown men don't get to fight for redemption. They just disappear into prison. How do you reconcile your redemption arc with their reality? The air thickened again. Wahlberg leaned forward now, his fists pressed against his knees. His voice grew louder, sharper, laced with anger. I've acknowledged my past, I've apologized, I've tried to make it right. What do you want from me? To wear a scarlet letter for the rest of my life? I've worked to lift people up, to give back, to show kids they can rise above. If that's not good enough, then maybe nothing ever will be. The audience roared, but again it was fractured, half in support, half in judgment. The panel exchanged glances, silent communication flashing between them like lawyers recalibrating strategy. Whoopi Goldberg finally leaned in, her tone heavy with both gravity and disbelief. Mark, nobody's saying you should wear a scarlet letter. But you need to understand something. The very fact that you're sitting here telling your redemption story on national TV proves the system worked differently for you. You were given chances others never even see. That's the point. Wahlberg exhaled sharply, shaking his head. His voice cracked with frustration, his Boston accent thickening under the stress. So, what do you want me to do, Whoopi? Quit acting? Stop working? Hand my career over to somebody else? I can't. Rewrite history. All I can do is be better today, that's all I've ever tried to do. Joy's voice cut back in, sharper now, tinged with sarcasm. You don't have to hand anything over, but maybe acknowledge that your better today came at a price others are still paying. The words lingered, cold and heavy. The camera caught Wahlberg's eyes narrowing, his face flushed red under the studio lights. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, his body language stiff and defensive. The courtroom had cornered him, and every reply only deepened the tension. The audience clapped again, but it was hesitant, scattered. Some rose to their feet, others remained seated in stone silence. Every reaction became part of the trial, verdict not yet finalized but forming piece by piece. Sunny leaned in once more, softening her tone but sharpening her impact. Mark, you've said you want to be an example for young people. But an example isn't just about success, it's about humility. Do you understand why some people feel you're still fighting to defend yourself instead of fully reckoning with the harm you caused? Wahlberg's breath caught. His eyes flickered with something raw, a flash of vulnerability beneath the anger. For a moment the mask slipped, and his voice trembled just slightly as he spoke. Because if I spend my whole life just reckoning, then I'll never move forward. I've lived with the guilt, the shame every day, but I also have kids who need to see a father who's better, stronger, not broken. If that's selfish, then I don't know what else to say. The audience clapped, this time more unified, as if struck by the rare moment of honesty piercing through the defensiveness. But the panel didn't relent. They had tasted blood in the water. The lights overhead seemed harsher now, glaring against Wahlberg's damp forehead. The camera zoomed in, catching his tight lips, his clenched jaw, the tremor in his voice. Every gesture betrayed that he was no longer in control. The panel had pushed harder, and Wahlberg was reeling under the pressure. The courtroom had shifted against him, and though the trial was far from over, one truth was becoming clear. His redemption was no longer his to narrate. It was theirs to challenge, and America's to judge. The gavel had not fallen yet, but the sound of its approach echoed in every heartbeat. The storm had fully broken by the time the cameras settled back on him. Wahlberg's voice had risen, his defenses sharpened, his patience worn thin. But the hosts weren't backing away. If anything, his defiance had energized them. The studio was no longer the set of a daytime talk show. It was the chamber of a divided court. And the clash now was no longer about one man's sins, but about two Americas staring each other down. The words forgiveness and accountability had hung in the air since the first question, circling like birds of prey. And now both sides moved to claim them. Joy Behar, her voice dry but sharpened, leaned forward. Mark, you talk about growth as if it's proof of justice. But growth for you meant a Hollywood career. For a lot of people, growth means trying to survive a prison sentence they never deserved in the first place. Do you see the difference? The audience murmured, some clapping, some jeering. Wahlberg's fists curled tightly in his lap, his jaw set hard. His reply came hot, rushed, almost desperate. I didn't get a free ride. I had to prove myself every single day. I fought my way out of a life that could have destroyed me, and if I can do it, others can too. Sunny Hostin's voice sliced through the rising noise, calm but cold, carrying the weight of her years in the courtroom. That's the problem, Mark. You keep holding yourself up as an example, but you are not the example. You are the exception. For every Mark Wahlberg who rises, there are 1,000 who don't. They stay stuck. They never get the call from Hollywood. They never get the forgiveness you got. The room fell into silence. Wahlberg looked at her, his chest heaving, the vein in his neck throbbing against the studio lights. His eyes darted briefly to the audience, as if searching for someone, anyone, who might stand as a witness in his defense. His voice cracked, with anger. So what do you want me to do? Carry every injustice in America on my back? I can't change the system. I can only change myself. I did that. I live differently. I raise my kids differently. I've given back. If you want to tear me down for it, then what does that say about forgiveness, about your idea of justice? The audience erupted, this time a chaotic blend of applause and boos, the clash of worldviews manifesting in real time. Half the room was on its feet, clapping for his defiance. The other half sat stone-faced, arms crossed, staring him down. Whoopee. Goldberg, silent until now, finally cut in. Her voice was low, but it carried through the noise like a gavel strike. It's not about tearing you down, Mark, it's about the truth. Justice isn't just about personal redemption, it's about fairness. And fairness means asking why you walked free when so many others like you never did. You can't separate your personal story from the system that made it possible. Her words hit him harder than any before. Wahlberg leaned back, his face pale beneath the flush of anger. He looked around the table, then back at the audience. His lips parted as though he had more to say, but for a moment, nothing came. Silence was deafening. Finally, he leaned forward again, his voice quieter now but no less fiery. I've spent my whole life running from who I was, fighting to be better. If that's not enough, if you're saying I'll never be allowed to move past it, then why should anyone else even bother trying? The crowd gasped. The remark landed like a challenge hurled at the nation itself. Some clapped ferociously, moved by his raw defiance. Others shook their heads, muttering under their breath, unmoved, unconvinced. Sonny's voice came again, softer this time, but with the unmistakable sting of a closing argument. Because redemption isn't about declaring yourself changed. It's about living with humility, about accepting that some people may never forgive you. That's their right, and you don't get to demand it. The weight of her words pressed down on him, and for a fleeting moment his composure faltered. His face softened, his shoulders dropped, and a flicker of exhaustion crossed his features. He was no longer just the defendant fighting for credibility. He was a man staring into the abyss of his own contradictions. The clash of worldviews had reached its peak. On one side, a man insisting on the possibility of personal change. On the other, a panel demanding acknowledgement that change, for one man, does not erase the inequities that bind millions. It wasn't just about Mark Wahlberg anymore. It was about America itself, its obsession with second chances for some, and its refusal of the same for others. The audience stood divided, their reactions spilling onto social media even as the cameras rolled. Clips were already being tweeted, arguments already erupting online. The View's studio had become a courtroom, and the clash of worldviews unfolding within its walls was reverberating far beyond them. As Wahlberg shifted again, sweat glistening on his brow, one truth became inescapable. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a trial of ideas, of privilege, of redemption itself, and the verdict was nowhere near unanimous. The table had become an arena. For nearly half an hour, Mark Wahlberg had parried accusations, fought off questions, and defended his right to redemption. But like a defendant pressed under relentless cross-examination, his defenses had begun to crack. Every rebuttal brought another sharper question. Every claim of growth met with another reminder of the past. His composure, once steady, was unraveling. The studio lights seemed hotter now, glaring against his skin. The audience, restless and divided, leaned forward as if waiting for a verdict. The hosts had their notes, their questions sharpened like blades. Wahlberg had only his anger left. Sunny Hostin leaned in, her voice low but carrying the precision of a closing argument. Mark, you said you've changed. But you also petitioned for a pardon to erase your record. Do you understand why that feels like privilege? You don't just want forgiveness. You want the system to forget. The words landed like a hammer. Wahlberg's face stiffened, his lips curling into a tight, reluctant sneer. He leaned forward, his voice raised now, echoing with the heat of frustration. You think I'm hiding? You think I don't wake up every single day knowing what I did? I've lived with that shame for decades, but I refuse to let it define me forever. His fist slammed against the glossy table, the sound reverberating through the studio. Gasps rippled through the audience. Behar leaned back slightly, her eyes narrowing in satisfaction, like a prosecutor watching the defendant lose his cool. Then why erase it? She snapped back. Why not own it? Why ask the system to scrub away what you say you've already paid for? Wahlberg's voice cracked, louder now, spilling over the studio like an unchecked storm. Because I don't want my kids growing up in the shadow of my worst mistakes. Because I don't want every headline to drag me back to who I was when I was 17. You think that's privilege? That's being a father. That's wanting to protect the people I love. The crowd broke into two factions, some applauding his raw emotion, others booing at what they saw as self-centeredness. The hosts glanced at each other, the air electric with the knowledge that they had pulled him to the edge.